owning our stories, owning our vulnerability, putting our needs as a higher priority on our own to-do list. I mean, really making these tools accessible to a broader audience. And I just feel like we all need the reminder that the way that we push and grind and fill and move so quickly and see everything with this sense of urgency is not normal.
Hi, I'm Deborah, an executive coach, consultant, and the founder of Doodle. After years of leading in education, often in spaces not built in, I now support others doing the same, especially women of color who are leading, healing, building, and figuring it out as they go. This is with Deborah, real talk about legacy, leadership, healing, and courage to lead without shrinking. We are all navigating so much, and we're still showing up. This space is here to remind you you are already enough. My next guest is somebody that my wife has been talking about and telling me about for years because of the profound impact that she's had on her. I want to say how much I've appreciated the conversation that I just had with Zabie Yamasaki. She is extraordinary. She's a healer, an educator, a trauma-informed yoga practitioner, an author, a mother, and someone whose work has quietly and powerfully shaped how thousands of people relate to their nervous system, their boundaries, and themselves. And before all of those credentials, before the books, before the institutions and programs, what really stood out to me during our conversation was her tenderness and her heart, her honesty, and her willingness to share the I in her story, to name the exhaustion, the survival mode, and what it actually takes to soften in the world. That is one that constantly asks us to override ourselves. We spoke about survival mode becoming a baseline, about rest, about why boundary work is our nervous system work, and learning slowly and imperfectly to trust what our bodies are telling us. I didn't rush during this episode at all. This episode is really just an invitation. So wherever you are, I invite you to take a breath, let your shoulders drop just a little, and join me for this extraordinary, amazing, all the things conversation with Zabie. I had a great conversation actually this morning. I got an invite for somebody that wanted to have a discovery call because, I do executive coaching and it's an old student of mine. Like, I haven't talked to Joel probably for 20 years. And Joel reached out to me, and I clearly say I do executive coaching for women of color, but okay, Joel. So he gets on and he's like, "Why do you look exactly the same you did when I met you?" And I'm like, "Because I laugh a lot, right? Like, yes, I've gone through a lot of things and trauma, and especially in the workplace, right? Racism, sexism, all the things. But one thing I was always clear on is like my why, and always like finding the joy and always wanting to be and laughing. So and like I think that's why you still see me looking the same because I'm always like trying to find the joy. So like him talking to him this morning was like a joyful moment. Um, so I get what you're saying about where we are as a nation. Um, and how heavy it is. But you're right, we are teachers. And I believe we're supposed to teach what we learn and what we know to others. We don't know who's going to hit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that wisdom and medicine, like that embodied wisdom is so needed in times like this. So,
So I didn't complete the book yet, but I've gotten through a lot of it and wow, what a story. And what a journey you've had. I really love like how you grew your audience and like the Stanford story, and then how that just grew into like that is amazing. And then like the cover it's a heart, right?
lungs.
Lungs, yeah. Like it's just like you're taking all of that in. Yeah, it's beautiful. So first, thank you so much, Zabi, for being my guest today. I've heard so much about you, and meeting you it is like inhaling joy into my lungs. My wife would always tell me about you and how important you were to her. And when we moved to LA, she was so excited to be able to be closer to you. So I'm glad that I get to finally meet you myself. And I'm so excited to talk to you today. So first want to say that. And then,
Well, now I'm already crying, and we have
well, you know, I call you famous Zabie, so now people will understand why. Um, how are you arriving today? How's your body, mind, and spirit?
oh, this is it's hard to answer that question right now, given, just the horrific ice raids that are happening all over the country. And, I think there's this juxtaposition. I have two small children, and so 8 years old and 10 months old. And sometimes I feel like the polarity of my life, in the trauma work that I do, and then, okay, let me go make snacks and PB&Js and take you to baseball, and then let me check the news and see what's happening. I think our nervous systems are certainly not designed to absorb all the information that we're absorbing in the intensity in which we absorb it. And I think it's been said that in a single morning, we actually absorb more news and images and information than our ancestors did in their entire lives.
Mm,
Think about that a lot in terms of my own activism and how I can show up in ways that feel sustainable and ethical and aligned, that I can show up with resource and bandwidth. So I've really been working on trying to find that balance. And, I'm a daughter of immigrants. And so also just explaining to my son when he sees me sad or impacted by what's going on, and really being able to be honest with him about the questions that he has. And, we're a very social justice oriented family, very feminist family. And my son is, he's a highly sensitive little soul, and just like his mom. So, I think today I'm just arriving with all of that, and in all my honesty and vulnerability and bravery. And actually, it's as you're asking that question, it's also making me think about how important community is to me, just how deeply sacred community is, and the way that I'm intentional about cultivating it, and how I want to model that for my kids. And I feel like, especially in these times, community is medicine and it's comfort. And just the other day, my car had broken down actually for the second time.
mm,
And I was, of course, in a rush, and I am on the verge of tears. And I text my neighbor and my mom friends in the area. And just within minutes, the support started pouring out. And it was just a reminder to me that even in the darkest times, we are held and we are supported, and that we're not alone in
mm.
what we're navigating and how we're showing up. So that's probably a really long answer to your question, but all the things that I'm holding this morning.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. I always find it so interesting about what we forget, what we give and what we forget, right? So you've created this mass following from the communities that you've created, creating a space for people to heal, to breathe, to move through the trauma, to right all the things that is really important to you to the lessons you've learned and now what you want to give back. And so often we forget we also need that.
Yes, exactly.
So
We
I want the audience to get to know more about who you are, right? So um your second book is coming out?
This is actually my seventh
Your
publication.
seventh book. Okay.
Seventh, I have affirmation decks and flip charts. This will be the third book, but seven.
Okay. Okay, your seventh book is coming out. So you have two human babies and then seven birth book babies. Okay, okay, I'm with you. I'm with you. So how did you become this version of yourself?
Yeah. Oh, wow, Deborah. Well, first of all, your presence is so deeply healing. Let me
Mm,
say, just being with you feels very healing because I think when women of color come together, we can be mirrors for one another and really help each other feel seen and affirmed. And of all the podcasts I've been on, I've never had somebody ask me a question in that way that makes me teary. So, first of all, thank you for seeing me and, recognizing just all that it's taken to get to this version of me,
mhm.
this point in my life. Because I think on the outside, people think it's all rainbows and butterflies and all came to me so easily, the success and the consulting and the publishing and, no, it was
Wow.
not easy to get here, and it took a lot of grit and resilience and hard work and belief in myself and not listening to the many voices that were out there, especially early in my career, that told me that my dreams were really ambitious. Or who am I to be the one, especially in a field that's dominated by white male researchers. I mean, rarely are women of color given opportunities to write these types of books or to get their message out there in their own unique way and power. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that I try to remind myself about a lot is, you asked me about this version of myself and there's this beautiful quote by Nakia Homer who says, one of the most beautiful things about who you are right now is all of the versions of you that kept going so you could get here.
Mm. Say that again, please.
Ah, it's Nakia Homer, and she says, one of the most beautiful things about who you are right now is all of the versions of you that kept going so you could get here. And I actually often read that quote when I'm teaching trauma informed yoga classes. And, as I kind of collectively scan the nervous systems in the room, you just see this, of course, there's tears. Of course, it brings so much to the surface. I think when we can honor the various parts of us that, and all the different versions. And, I would say I'm a very sensitive soul. And I used to see that version as a sign of weakness that, oh, I'm just too much or I feel too deeply. And now I've learned to see that version as a sign of strength. I think that in a world that wants us to be numb to the pain and suffering of others, the ability to feel and to feel deeply is such a gift.
Mm,
And I choose to not numb myself from what's happening around me. I choose to stay present, and that allows me to align with my work in the way that I know only I can. And I would say that we all bring our own unique power to our respective fields. And
mhm.
people, will meet with me for an individual consultation and then they'll say, well, there's all these people doing trauma informed work. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. We need you doing it in the way that you do it. And so, yeah, I guess I would just say that staying true to my heart and my spirit has brought me to this place. I've never been someone who's colored inside the lines or done things in a traditional way.
Thank God.
I'm like, I've always kind of, my master's is in higher education and
Really?
and student affairs. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, that will have to be a different podcast because, like, once you're in higher education and student affairs, you don't think you can get out.
Facts. I think working in enough toxic environment that even shape our environments have a significant impact on our nervous systems, and
Mm,
I know we're gonna talk about boundaries later, I'm sure, but, I think I've really had to learn how my body responds to what is a no and what is a yes.
mm,
I think when we work in toxic spaces, that can show up as stomach aches, always being sick. I mean, there are so many very real and visceral ways our bodies communicate to us that more boundaries are needed or that this is
mm,
a space for us or for our spirit.
mhm, mhm,
And so I think I just tried to carve out a different path for myself because I couldn't hang in the traditional scope of higher education. And I knew that there were such significant gaps in services for trauma survivors, and that we had to include the body in the equation when we're talking about healing. And we can't just do things the traditional way because they've always been done that way. And so I definitely, made some moves in higher ed. I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but it allowed me to carve out a path for myself that I never could have dreamed being here and doing the work that I get to do every day.
that's fantastic. Yeah, not being everybody's cup of tea is okay, because I actually don't like all the tea that's handed to me either, so I love that. So, I know that experiences in our lives often shapes a lot of things that are going on in our nervous system, right? So you name like the workplace. You in the book, you also name some other things that you've gone through and moved through. I'd love to just learn more about any experiences that you've gone through that has shaped how your nervous system has learned how to not just survive, but also move through. Because so many of us hold so much in our bodies, but we don't talk about it, right? There's tons of books out there, but who's talking about our nervous system?
This is such an important question because that I've had many experiences of trauma that have shaped my journey living in survival mode. From being a survivor of sexual trauma, being a daughter of immigrants and just that's obviously not a traumatic experience, but I think the pressure that so many children of immigrants have to prove their worth, to be the best, to never feel like they're enough because so much of our external validation is oftentimes proved through our productivity. Um, being, losing my son in the 26th week of my pregnancy, going through a very trying season of fertility treatments and IVF, which ultimately led to my miracle baby, Leilani. And I think that, the thing about survival mode is when we get stuck, sort of living in this prolonged state of hypervigilance, it really complicates our relationship to rest. And for so long, for me, rest never actually felt restorative. It felt more like collapse.
Mm,
And I talk about this with many women of color a lot, just about, I ask the question is when you reflect on the presence of peace or rest in your life, does it actually feel restorative or does it feel like that just collapse at the end of the day? I'm so exhausted. I can't move on. I can't do anything more. And I have had to practice a lot of kindness and compassion with myself as I reflect on all of the times I tried to heal my burnout or survival mode with quick fixes
mhm,
instead of sustainable practices and values and boundaries. I think that when we're really in the thick of it, it can be really challenging to know what's going to help. And I think ultimately, it took me really looking at my life and recognizing that I had to get to the root, you know?
mm,
Um, Angela Davis says that radical simply means getting to the root. And I love that reminder because sometimes we're trying to put band-aids and trying to find these quick fixes as opposed to looking at our life and what's unsustainable, whether it's being in a toxic environment or looking at our values, looking at the way that we're setting our boundaries from a mind, body, spirit lens. Just really taking that gentle recalibration and knowing that another way is possible. And I would say that healing the survival mode is certainly a lifelong journey. I feel like I've been in relationship with my own capacity for a really long time, thinking about a capacity practice that I do even just with my partner of where are you at this week? Where
Mhm.
am I at this week? Okay, you're at 50%, I'm at 10%. So,
Mhm.
just recognizing that also it's never going to be 50-50 in any partnership and knowing how can we make it a practice of generosity and care towards each other by being honest with ourselves about our own capacity so we can function and show up for our lives.
Mhm.
I also really love to make it a practice to take an embodied check-in of my own capacity before I say yes to anything else. And I know embodied check-in sounds really fancy, but sometimes it's just like literally something as simple as resting a palm on your heart and belly and just taking a scan. Am I emotionally exhausted? Am I worn out? Or do I have a little more bandwidth right now? Do I have a little more resource? Do I have a little more to give?
Mhm.
And asking yourself questions before you take on more of like, does the thought of doing this energize me or does it deplete me?
Mhm.
Is the compensation I'm receiving for this project I'm about to take on accurately reflect the amount of work I'm going to be pouring into this?
And
You know, that's
that
like
is something we have to really get clear on, right? Like that right there is hard, right? Especially when you're starting in the beginning. You're like, I could do this. I know it's not exactly what I should be getting paid for, but if I do this, you're making like certain allowances for exposure. And it never works that way. So you should just get paid.
what you deserve.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am the biggest advocate for women of color to ask for the moon, ask for the stars. I just feel like too often, and I do believe that women of color are disproportionately impacted by asks like these.
Mhm.
No, because our labor is oftentimes not seen as valuable. And so people think the amount of times people reach out to me for free things, I'm like, no, no, no,
But
no.
you used to though, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You are listening to the Do Better with Deborah podcast with trauma informed yoga instructor, consultant, author, keynote speaker, Zabie Yamasaki. Make sure to visit DoBetterExecutiveCoaching.com and learn how you can lean into your power and lead with confidence, purpose, and joy. And now back to the podcast.
So what was that turning for you to be like, no, I can't continue to do this? There has to be a switch. It's almost like, and I can say this for myself, it's almost like before I believed in myself, but for some reason, it's almost like I had two Debras happening. Believe myself. But when it came to like charging people and giving the fan away for free, it's like I'm still trying to prove myself, even though that I know. And when I'm doing that, giving the fan for free, it really didn't feel great. But I'm trying to say, like, if I do this, then it's going to lead to this. And looking back, I'm like, I shouldn't just charge what I deserve. So what was the switch for you?
I had this experience working for a very elite college who I was basically helping them integrate trauma informed yoga into the scope of their work, training all of their staff, giving them the curriculum I had written. I mean, for and for a very elite private college of this
Mm,
stature, I should have known, they have the resources to be able to appropriately pay me. But I think I was so caught up in that of, "Oh, but it's this college, and
Yeah.
if I just do this, then, I'm afraid if I put out a bigger number that they're gonna say no, and then the opportunity will go away." I mean, we have
Mhm.
this meeting with ourselves of
Mhm.
walking through every scenario and oftentimes doubting ourselves or doubting our worth or, it's fine, I'll just do it." And I did do that, and I charged them an embarrassingly low number, which later went on to tell me that they would've paid me, like, 3 times the amount that I
And they will
charged.
now.
I know, I was like, "I'm happy to retroactively receive the payment, thank you."
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there was a specific turning point. I think it was a gentle process that kind of unveiled itself where I really started to see myself. And
Mhm.
I I I don't know if this is the best example, but I was not doing well. Just my mental health was struggling. I was having rolling panic attacks. And I went from leading a 3-day certification training to giving a keynote at Duke. And I was so stressed that I was not going to be able to do this keynote just because I didn't feel like I had it in me. And I think even my therapist at the time was like, "Are you sure you want to go do this?" And I'm like, "No, I can do it." And I remember, how sometimes the buildup to the actual thing is actually worse than when we're actually in our element and in our flow?
I
You
do. Mhm.
Because we put so much pressure on ourselves or the perfectionist tendencies start to come out. And I remember I just felt my feet on the ground and I didn't even look at my notes and I just did that keynote and it was literally one of the best
Oh,
speeches
wow.
like I've ever given. And I kind of just had this moment with myself after that keynote, just feeling really proud and obviously not wanting to encourage myself to override my nervous system or do things when I'm unwell. But it was kind of this moment that I had of like, you are worthy of doing things on your timeline, of pacing yourself, of charging what you deserve, like
Mhm.
it was just, I felt like I could finally see myself. Like the enoughness wasn't an issue anymore.
Mhm.
Years of wondering, am I enough? Can I do this? Do I have the strength? Do I have the resilience? I know nothing about owning a business. Where do I even start? And just
Mhm.
yeah, that was a powerful moment for me of just knowing that I may not be for everyone, but for the spaces that see my worth and see my value, that I'm worth asking.
Mhm.
And obviously, we can always negotiate and try to work within budget, but I feel like we should always ask for that high number that we know we deserve. And so I've made it a practice to always ask for more and then also know where my threshold is of like, okay, if they can't do that, then what's going to be my bottom line? Because
Mhm.
I also am aware of how much I pour into every project I take on, whether it's a training or a consulting gig. I know I'm gonna be overgiving.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's factoring in all of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that part about I know how much I pour into it, and I know I'm over giving.
Mhm.
So therefore, that's all part of my price.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So, author, 7 times. Why this new book and why now?
Oh, I feel like so often we need the reminder that what our nervous system actually needs is less.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a big part of the healing process is trusting that our growth and our evolution is still and especially happening in our moments of stillness and in our moments of rest. And I know for me, clarity and wisdom tend to surface when I've given myself the gift of spaciousness and having buffers and margins in my day and space between things. I think a big part of my own healing has been learning to not always fill the space, to really be so gentle with myself of unlearning those, I give a lot of just grace and compassion to all of my survival responses and the way that they helped keep me safe. And then I can also recognize what's no longer serving me anymore. And so this book is really about taking some of those foundational elements of trauma-informed care and nervous system physiology that has really been the core of my work of, really leading these classes for trauma-informed yoga classes for survivors and leading the trauma-informed yoga certification trainings. But now taking sort of the nervous system physiology, the somatics of boundaries, owning our stories, owning our vulnerability, putting our needs as a higher priority on our own to-do list. I mean, really making these tools accessible to a broader audience. And I just feel like we all need the reminder that the way that we push and grind and fill and move so quickly and see everything with this sense of urgency is not normal. Well, but we've been so accustomed to believe that it is, that we should be living with responding to every message immediately and putting our needs as the last priority. And I also just wanted to write a book that felt restorative as you read it. That it really feels intentional and mindful and full of breath and space and practice, because I think that so often there's so many books on trauma and the nervous system that are so cognitive and sciencey,
Yeah.
and you're just like, what am I even like?
Yeah.
This is not accessible to me, and really feeling the relief and respite in my nervous system. And there's also a lot of books that train other people in how to do this work, as opposed to let me just read this and let it be a gift
It
for
felt
myself.
like it. It really
And
feels like it. It really feels like you're talking from the I perspective rather than I didn't feel like you were talking to me. I felt like, oh, she feels this too. I mean, wow, like there's some lines in there where it starts with I was tired, I was tired, I was tired. And then you go on to like name certain things, right? Like functioning from an empty well, measuring your worth based on your productivity, right? Those like I think there's probably 10 of them. So I was reading them out loud to myself when I was reading, and I was like, oh my God, like who said this? Oh, I see it. I don't say it out loud, but I have felt this. And now somebody's actually naming it. And so what I love about the book is there's a lot of stories. And then there's a lot of affirmation. And then there's a lot of like, I'm feeling this too. I felt this, and this is how I stopped and took pause to unlearn this to do different because this is how it's affecting me in my nervous system. And so the way that you've written this is like, I love it. It is so good. And typically I would hear about the other style of books that you named earlier. And I couldn't even get through them because I'm like, do you see me? Do you actually know what I'm feeling?
Mhm.
Or is it just a blanket thing that I'm supposed to like try to like interpret and try to apply? I don't have to do that with this book. So job well done.
Thank you so much. It's such a special process. This was my first time recording an audiobook, and it felt really sacred and special to read it out loud. And as you were speaking, it really reminds me, there's this quote by Nikki Myers, who does a lot of great work in yoga for recovery communities. And she says, there's no hierarchy in healing.
Mm,
And, as you were speaking, and like so often when we're reading these books, it just, I never am trying to say, oh, well, I'm further along in my healing journey. So I don't have it all figured out. I'm just, sharing from this mutual place of where we can see each other and be honest. I'm just so tired of books that seemingly, the author has it all together or has reached this arbitrary finish line. I want us to be more comfortable of celebrating ourselves right in the middle or right in
mm,
the thick of where we are. I
mm,
think too often we wait until the experience we're going through is tied up in a pretty bow. We've moved through fertility treatments and now we have the baby, or we're going through a divorce and we've finally reached the other side. I mean, so many of us need support right in the middle.
mhm, mhm.
And I think we've been so accustomed to just thinking like, okay, let me just hold it together until things get better. And I just want us to get more comfortable with being with each other right in our middles. I think
Mm,
is just a
mhm.
really powerful place for us to feel seen and to seek support and to know that we're not alone in anything that we're navigating.
So earlier we were talking about fairs and higher ed and boundaries and the yes and the no. So it's so hard for so many people to say no, right? I often tell a story about like if you come in as a yes person to a job, they're always going to see you as that yes person. Fortunately, I didn't get that problem. I didn't have that problem. I was never a yes person, but I would work really hard in a different kind of way to prove my worth. No one would ask me, but I would volunteer to do many things because I'm like, okay, I'm a Black woman. Okay, you gotta see me. Okay, you see that I can hold all this stuff and go above and beyond. Then maybe you will appoint me to this position, or when I apply, maybe I'll get the higher position, right? So, so exhausting. All to find out none of that was worth it. It cost me a lot. And now I have very strict boundaries on the opposite end. So I'd love to know, like, what does that do to the nervous system? What have you learned about boundaries? And how do you say yes? And how do you say no?
Oh gosh, Deborah. Well, first of all, I want to just say that you're not alone in the toll that these workplaces and especially the toxicity of academia and higher education. I think I have seen it firsthand with my own eyes that, you could give and give and give and please see me, please see me. Literally, you could pour your whole heart and soul in and it's still not enough. You and I have talked about this before that we don't need that external validation when we're so anchored in our own worth.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think that's been a big part of my boundary process is like, I don't need to take these scraps, like
Yes.
please don't come to me with can you
Mhm,
give this free training for our social workers when we have this huge budget. It's really being so clear and aligned in your own worth, no matter what storm is in chaos around you to really be aligned there, and I think it does kind of create that buffer and shield for me when I am thinking about what is an absolute yes and what is an absolute no. And I think it's also getting more comfortable with paying attention to and being in relationship with the cues of our nervous system instead of overriding them. And I think that oftentimes starts with something as simple as tending to our basic needs.
mhm.
I know when I was working in very toxic universities, I literally would not even go to the restroom when I needed to go to the restroom because I just felt like I need to meet with this student and I need to go do that
Yeah.
outreach. I need to- Right.
And skipping lunch. Yep. Mhm,
I'm like eating cashews at my
mhm.
desk and never seeing the sun. I mean, it feels very tender when I reflect back on some of those early days in my career, because certainly at that time, no one was talking about the nervous system or boundaries or how to approach our work in ways that feel spacious and aligned, and knowing that we're worthy of communicating our capacity. I mean, this is all the language that I'm writing about now in this book is what I wish I had had back then, because I really had no language for what I was experiencing.
I wonder if it's interesting about how the mind works, though.
Yeah.
Even if you read it back then, would you have been able to take it in? I say that because in my 40s, I feel like I've said that before, and then I would think, was I even able to take that in?
Mm.
Right? And now that I'm in my 50s, I'm like, I don't know that my mind would have been able to comprehend your book, because I'm also receiving messages over here for something completely different. I'm also watching other women of color work their asses off, right? Getting in there, the first, leaving the last. This is what you have to do. And then those messages we receive throughout our lives, right? You got to work harder than everybody else, all that stuff. So I don't know that I would have been able to take in what you're writing today, because I have to get to a place where I'm rejecting all the other stuff to be able to make room for this.
100%. We cannot bypass the wisdom that we've gained in all these years.
Mhm.
We just we could have read the same book 10 years ago, exactly as you're saying, and we're just like, what?
Mhm.
I think with time and embodied wisdom, things land differently. I
Mhm.
know somebody could read my book in one season when they're navigating something challenging, and then maybe read it in another season where they have a little more space and resource, and the ideas are really starting to land, and maybe the defense mechanisms and the armor is starting to come down a little bit, where maybe it's just one message that they're taking in.
Mhm.
And actually, I read something that Michelle Obama said the other day that I loved, and she said, I need all of you 120 percenters to get more comfortable with your 50% and know that that's enough.
Mm.
And I was like, "Whew,
Mhm.
my 50% is enough." You know,
Yep,
that I don't have to give all of myself away during the day.
you don't.
I can still be of service and be successful in my role and save some of that energy for me and for my family.
Yep.
You are listening to the Do Better with Deborah podcast with Dr. Deborah Y. Griffith and her very special guest, trauma-informed yoga instructor, consultant, author, and keynote speaker, Zabie Yamasaki. You can find her on Instagram under Transcending Trauma Yoga or on her website, yabiyamasaki.com, for more information. Pre-order your copy of her new book, Protect Your Energy, a gentle guide to nurture your nervous system, cultivate rest, and honor your needs on Bookshop, Barnes & Noble, or Amazon today. And now, back to the podcast.
That's definitely something we haven't been taught, right?
No. We want to go hard and do the most and work
Mhm.
the hardest and be the best and get the seat at the table. I'm like, I don't even want a seat at that table. I want my own table with all my people who are good for my nervous system surrounding me, and know
Mhm.
that that is the alchemy and that's the magic and that's the
Mhm.
freedom. I think ultimately I've learned that my most important values are family and freedom. To wake up and have the slow morning with my kids, to be able to show up to their activities and do a keynote later in the evening, or schedule a training when I have more capacity and can really look at the bandwidth of my month. I mean, I wasn't able to do that when I worked in those environments. I remember one time I led 3 trainings back to back to back. I hadn't eaten all day, and I literally opened the refrigerator in the break room, and I took a bite out of a tomato. Like, that was the
You were
only
that that's how tired you were?
how tired I
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And I was like, "I don't even have time to go get something to eat right now." And I literally ate a tomato like it was an apple. Like, I was just like, "What the hell am I even doing right now?" And I knew I didn't wanna live that way anymore. And it's certainly the toll the toll of all those moments and all those lessons. I mean, it's definitely brought me here, and I wouldn't say it's easy now. I have I still have my own journey and my own lessons unfolding, but I do think there's something really beautiful, Deborah, that you're speaking to about wisdom and age and having the opportunity to mother again at 40 has been a deeply reparative experience for me postpartum.
Mm,
As there's just lessons that I know now at 40, having the opportunity to do this again 8 years later that I didn't know back when I had Hudson and I was a maniac and not sleeping and it's been a really joyful experience. And it's because I of the wisdom of the things I know I wanna stress about versus what I can let go.
mm. That's a good segue because you talk a lot about a long relationship with the word ease and
Mm,
what ease has taught you that
mhm.
overworking never could.
Yes.
Mhm. Wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. There's one line in your book about boundary work as nervous system work.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
I think we spoke to this a little bit before about just this notion that we cannot cut ourselves off from the very real and visceral ways our bodies are constantly communicating to us. And so I think there's a reason why we oftentimes hear the phrase trust your gut.
Mm,
And I think in the simplest of terms, our bodies communicate through sensation.
mm,
And when we think about in a singular moment of like this interaction I'm having or this request that I got, and you're kind of reflecting on what's happening in your body. And if it's communicating to you that something is a no, that might show up as kind of like a flushed feeling in your face or your heart starting to race or your stomach just swirling of somebody who texts you that maybe doesn't respect your boundaries. I think we all can kind of reflect on those moments we have of like, oh, this is a hell no.
yeah.
you
Mm,
know,
yep.
and my body is telling me with every fiber in my being that this is a no.
Uh-huh.
And then you might reflect on something that's a yes. And maybe you just feel that relaxed feeling in your shoulders where you can really just kind of drop in, or you feel that warm feeling in your heart of like, yeah, I would love this opportunity, or I would love to do this, or yes, I want to support my friend with this thing. I mean, it could be a number of things. And I think boundary work as nervous system work is really all of us getting more aligned with what does it mean to honor our capacity in an ongoing and fluid way and to trust the messages of our nervous system instead of overriding them and to respond in ways that feel kind and compassionate. I was giving a training recently, and one of the women in the audience, she kind of raised her hand and she had tears in her eyes. And she was like, I feel like I'm doing all of the things. I'm meditating. I'm going to therapy. I'm taking my kids on adventures on the weekend. I'm excelling at work. I'm. And
Mm,
she's like, I'm still struggling so much. And, I looked at her with so much love and compassion and just reminded her that sometimes what our nervous system needs is less. And we have this tendency for the frenetic pace of our lives to also play out in our self care. Like, let me just squeeze in this thing, or let me go see my friend, or get this workout in. And then before we know it, all the space is filled. when really maybe your body is asking for you to completely cancel everything on your schedule and just give yourself space to be, even as uncomfortable as that may be, right? Because that's a practice in and of itself, is just learning to be in the stillness.
Mm.
And I know sometimes if we do have an hour in our day, we might put pressure on ourselves to do a really intense workout or to make the most of it, where maybe our body is asking for legs up the wall or for a walk around the block. Like,
Mhm.
maybe that's what is needed in that day. So I would say this notion of just honoring our capacity and boundary work as nervous system work is all of these messages around where can I create more space for myself in my life.
Mm. I was going to ask you for my last question, what's one mental permission you would give to somebody, but maybe that's maybe that was it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've enjoyed our conversation. I think when I was talking to you earlier about the image that's on the cover of your book, and it's one, I think in my head I felt and saw a heart because of what you poured into the book and the energy that you give across the screen, and just the way that the sound of your voice, it sounds like pure heart.
Why you make me cry like 5 times today?
It's my gift. Um, how can people find you? What's the name of the book? Um, and what's coming up that you want to share with the audience?
Oh my goodness. I first of all, this conversation has been such a gift, and you're such a healer, Deborah, just by being you,
Thank
just as you are. And you are very, very special. I've never met anyone like you, truly. You have a real gift for energy and affirmation and healing, and we just need so much more of that in the world. And I think at the end of the day, so many of us are craving to feel seen, and just know and trust that the work that you do is rippling and radiating out to all the communities that you serve. And this has just been such a joy to be with
you, Zabie. That's high praise from you. I really like received that. Thank you.
you. Yes. And I love that I think women of color need to practice the act of receiving.
Mm.
Even you just modeling that for your community, because we're so quick to just deflect or just, "Oh,
Mhm. I used to be that. I used to be that. That's book 8 for you.
no." Oh, yeah. I love that so much, and just the act of receiving and generosity. Um, you can find me on Instagram at Transcending Trauma with Yoga, and on my website at zabieyamasaki.com. The new book is called Protect Your Energy, a gentle guide to nurture your nervous system, cultivate rest, and honor your needs. And if anything was sparked for you in this conversation today, it's all in the book. It really is meant to be a restorative love letter to your nervous system, and a mirror and an affirmation, I think, of all the things that we need to be reminded of giving ourselves permission to receive help and to receive care, and little reminders of how repetition and predictability can support us when we're struggling with a dysregulated nervous system. Like, leaning into this is literally my favorite mug that I drink out of every day. And there's something so comforting and nurturing to me about that. And I think when the world gets really loud and really intense, reminding ourselves to come back to the comforts that we know,
Mm.
to give us the glimmer, to give us the resource to continue doing the work that we're doing. And Yeah, so I would love to connect with you on trainings, on the book. Deborah, thank you so much for having me.
My
This
pleasure.
conversation's gonna stay with me for a very long time.
Me too. Me too. Thank you, Zabie. I will be forever grateful for this conversation. What is staying with me is the reminder that healing doesn't always look dramatic or visible. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's choosing not to push. Sometimes it's finally listening to what your body has been telling you for a long time. We spoke about survival mode, boundaries, rest, and the slow work of learning how to honor our capacity. We also spoke about the hard yes and the hard no's, especially in the world that keeps asking for more. Zabie's new book, Protect Your Energy, will feel like something you want to return to, not something you want to rush through, especially in those moments when you're tired, overwhelmed, or just trying to remember yourself again. If something in this conversation resonated with you, you don't have to do anything with it right now. Just noticing is enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for taking care of yourself in whatever ways you can right now. Until next time.
You've been listening to trauma-informed yoga instructor, consultant, author, and keynote speaker, Zabie Yamasaki. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show, leave a rating or review, and share with a friend or colleague. You can always find Do Better with Deborah on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now on YouTube. Thanks for listening.